Hello, everyone, and welcome to Project Kin's special event today, The Scoop on Memories. I'm delighted to welcome Diane Burley, who has become a dear friend to Project Kin for her enthusiasm and delight in the subject of families and memories. That led to a conversation about how family stories are remembered. And she started to whisper to me about a story in her own family that combined what she remembered about an event with her kids and then how her kids remembered it. You can see more about that in the Sunday Substack Live that we did earlier this week. But today we get a deeper program. And Diane comes to us with a deep background as an author, a writer, blogger. And actually, with me, she shares an experience in the early days of tech as an entrepreneur in the crazy blogging world way back then in the early days of tech. But that's not what we're here for. We're here all about family stories. And with that, I'm going to pause and hand it over to you, Diane. Go ahead, take it away.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to be here. And I know you guys are such an exciting and enthusiastic community. So I'm learning a lot from all of you as well. So I want this to be completely informal. Let's use the chat, jump in. It's a small group today. I think it's the dog days of summer and people are probably at the beach. What I'd like you to do right now, right off the bat, is grab a pencil and paper. We're going to do some memory exercises, and I think it'll be fun. I also want to tell you a little bit else. I'm a former reporter, and I approach genealogy and family history from a reporter's lens. In other words, I believe nothing. I have to get 2 or 3 sources to tell me the same thing before I do believe it. And even then, there's some skepticism. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I'm living now in New Jersey. I have 2 grown sons, and they are my husband and the boys. They're all my muses, really. They come to me with story ideas. They know what I'm working on, and they're my best editors. They tell me when I've missed it, and they tell me when I nail it. So anything you're reading of mine has usually gone through this very set of critical eyes. I got into writing about family history because I'm working on a book project about an ancestral relative, Leonora Carney-Berry. And Leonora is largely, she was largely ignored by the historians. And that's because of some facts that got in the way of historians actually being able to keep up with her, find out what she was up to. And so she sort of suffered by that female erasure that goes on so, regularly, even to this day, sadly. So working on Leonora's story has put me into this whole family writing universe. It is a book project. We're hoping that I can pull that book together in time for her 100th anniversary of her death, which would be in I almost said 1930, 2030. 1930 was when she passed. So, and then, when you're writing about that, and Leonora lived in upstate New York, way upstate New York. That's where my mother was from. And I wanted to write more about the environment in which she grew. So I started digging into more of the family lore on my mother's side of the family that I had been distanced from because my mother passed almost 40 years ago. So I lost her so young, when you're still in that very self-centered mode with life and you really haven't taken the time to dig in to find out what the family's all about. But I'm blessed with the fact that my mother's eldest sister, there were 6 girls altogether. The eldest sister is 103 in September. So I've been spending a lot of time talking to Aunt Molly, getting perspective. And she was very excited about this whole Leonora thing. She's the one who told me about it when I was up at her 100th birthday party. She said, we have this relative that was a labor activist. And she apparently went when the governor of New York was doing a plaque commemoration. So she was up in the Amsterdam area, which is where Leonora eventually moved to. So that's where my family journey has been taking me. And then as I write on my mother's side, I look back at my father's side, with whom I had a much closer relationship. And I got involved with looking at the newspaper articles, which, as you all know, the newspapers in the 40s, 50s, 60s was like the Facebook of today. The women's pages, they told you what they were wearing, what they were working on, when they got up and danced. I couldn't believe it. My grandmother and my grandfather were caught dancing at an event. I never knew my grandfather danced. So, there's these little insights have been helping me pull together all of these perspectives. So it's been a lot of fun. What we're going to talk about today are memories, episodic versus semantic memories, and the idea that our memory is not this true recorder of events. We remember an event, but what we really remember is how we felt during that event. Did we feel isolated? Did we feel in love? Did we feel like we were accepted? What were the feelings that came about when this occurrence was going on? And that tends to be what the memory is all about. When we talk about, and then we talked about the Sundays are for Sundays, and I know some new people around, so I'll just do real briefly. I said to my eldest son, I was looking for a story, and he says, "Why don't you talk about how Sundays are for Sundays?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" It was an event. The boys were probably 6 and 4. I always had the family over on the weekends. They had all left. My husband was on a business trip, and I was tired. I was just plain tired. I had towels to, put through the dryer, and little boys needed to be fed for the 48th time of the day, and there were dishes to be cleaned. And I'm thinking to myself, I really don't want to make another meal. Sundays, why don't we have Sundays? Because Sundays are for Sundays. And they looked at me in horror. They couldn't believe that their mother was suggesting such, a thing. And I think they thought it was a bit of a trap, and they were going to get in trouble if they actually agreed. So they were really, really reticent. Even when the dishes were put in front of them, they really didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then after they finished their Sundays in silence, they asked for dinner. So I had to make a sandwich. So I was really surprised that after all this time, he equated Sundays and he saw it as this new tradition. Well, something else occurred shortly after that. My younger son for Christmas had wanted an ice cream maker. We were always cooking in the house, and he wanted an ice cream maker. So we got one of those Cuisinart ice cream makers, and we tended to do it on Sundays when mom and dad weren't working and we were there. And when we moved back up to Buffalo when the kids were like 6 and 8, my dad would come over every Sunday to have this homemade ice cream. And so he started connecting this Sundays are for Sundays one time event into that. Don't you remember? That's this tradition we had all these years. I, on the other hand, suffered from the double whammy of feeling, the female guilt and the mom guilt of having been lazy. I mean, because really at the end of the day, that's what it was all about. I was exhausted and didn't feel like cooking. So I slapped some ice cream in bowls and threw it at them. And I thought, I can't do that ever again. That was really a bad thing to do. So that's how I equate that Sundays are for Sundays with a very negative thing. And that's really what's kicked off this whole idea about memories with Barbara. So this idea that this, and I find it fascinating that both the boys view this as a very strong positive event. And I saw it as this strong negative event. So I'm just curious now, as we take a step, and we've got our paper and pens here, can you think of a situation with you and a sibling or a cousin or a friend where you would have this very strong disagreement about the same memory? And I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear what you guys come up with. Dead silence. Well, while you guys are all thinking about that, I'm going to go on to the next thing. So what constitutes the truth then? If our memories are so faulty or so, it's really in the eye of the beholder, if you will, what constitutes the truth? What would be a semantic truth that would not have a bias to it, so we think? What might be, and I know you guys talk about this all the time. So what are those facts that you're looking for to validate this indeed is a historic record? What are some of the concrete sources that you use and you go, yeah, that's probably pretty accurate? Do you have any?
Well, I think for the genealogy crowd that gathers here, they're right down to proofs of whether something is true and how many documents it takes to validate, third party or official documents it takes to validate a truth. I see Jennifer jumping off of the mute button there. I have a feeling she's got some insights to where those come, because as you know, I'm not a real genealogist. Jennifer?
No, sorry, I was writing down my little memory. So do you want me to tell you that now?
So
Yeah.
the sources, yeah.
I haven't thought about it in years, actually, Diane, until you just brought it up then. So for my 13th birthday, my mother, I spoke to Mum about this just the other day because I'm going to visit her every week. She's getting a little bit frail now, and she lives away from me. But her memory's not bad, you know. And I said to her, do you remember my 13th birthday when you asked what I would like? I had a girlfriend coming over for dinner, and I said pavlovas, like little pavlovas, because I had been to my girlfriend's house and had my very first pavlova on her birthday. So Mum made the pavlovas, and my birthday's in January. And we weren't Celsius then. So Fahrenheit temperature in those days was, quite common, about 113. And we didn't have proper fridges then, So Mum made the pavlova and put it somewhere with some ice, and it just wasn't enough. So when she pulled the pavlova out, all beautiful, covered with cream and strawberries, the cream had turned. Anyway, I just remember that was so fantastic that we had pavlovas on my 13th birthday, and then we went off to the movies. When I asked Mum about it the other day, she was absolutely horrified that I would even mention it.
See?
Because these pavlova, she'd worked on it all week, trying to get it perfect and work out how to keep them cold, and it was a disaster as far as Mum was concerned.
She remembers taking you all to the hospital because she gave you, Tomac or something.
That's right. And she'd heard probably for about 6 months about what the wonderful pavlova I'd had in the middle of winter at my girlfriend's house. And she was going to replicate that in summer. So, yeah, so I understand where you're coming from with that. Yeah, but I'd never thought of that really until last week when I did ask Mum last week. But, yeah. So
it's such a great story.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about truths, a lot of times we're looking at census data, marriage certificates, birth certificates, death certificates. We look at those as the facts, right? The facts, the supporting facts that say this is accurate. These are true things, because usually, things that are coming out of government records are not fiction. Sometimes they are lately, but not always. Really? But it is funny about census data, right? That's probably the one that trips us up the most, because there's judgments in census data. Like on my side of the family, my dad's side, when they came over from Sicily, it said he was a farmer. I mean, a farmer is a reductionist term for they owned land, and the land had olive groves. I mean, yeah, I guess he was a farmer, but I mean, he's also speaking a different language and coming here, and maybe, I don't know that they had like a drop-down list, but they were probably, they were suggestions as to what they should use. for the women, most of them were housewives or homemakers or wife. I mean, which again, that's that's a pretty short label for someone who's doing a million different things. And a lot of times was even actually running a cottage industry out of the house. And maybe, you know, my grandmother was a school teacher. Well, once you got married, you could no longer teach. However, you could substitute teach, which she did all the time. So was it full-time where you had a contract? No, because you couldn't have a contract with the wife. And that'll get me into a whole nother story, so I won't get into that. But she was a teacher, and but that was again my grandmother or my aunt helped me understand how Grammy could be both a teacher and not allowed to teach. On my dad's side of the family, my grandmother was also a homemaker, and yet she also was president of the Ladies Auxiliary for Erie County Medical Center, which at the time was the Poor Person's Hospital. And they were building a wing. So you tell me how you're building a wing and being a full-time homemaker. She actually got an award for almost 1,000 hours of volunteer work in a single year, which if you calculate it out is probably a half-time employee, right? So these terms are not very helpful. And if we go strictly by what we see as a fact, we're going to be in trouble. I know too, on tombstones, a lot of times it just says spouse. And we don't know if that's the first wife, the second wife, we don't know. And it's funny, I'm digging into some other ancestral relatives right now. And I think that there's been confusions along the way because, especially with women, it's hard to know how to indicate a woman who's had multiple husbands through death, children with last names, and then they say she had 3 children, but no, there were 2 others, but they had a different last name than the last husband. So, and I know you guys have seen this on a regular basis. How do you handle it? How do you handle those facts when you're writing them down? Do you use special software, or this is Diane learning from you, or do you just put post-it notes all over your house like I do?
Well, I'll speak up. It's Laura. So I do it on my software for sure, but I also probably paid the most attention to the wife who is my relative.
Right.
Okay. So I'll acknowledge the other one with children and everything because, of course, they have the same father, but I don't pay as much attention. I don't know why, but I don't. I full parents, but I do acknowledge it and create files too for those people.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've been doing too. So every semantic memory then is a snapshot that's taken from a lens. Okay, it's a lens. It's not the lens, but it's a lens of someone else who's had to quickly make this judgment about somebody. Now, the next thing I want you to consider, so we have like the difference between truths. We have a truth, but now let's look at the sources of the truth. Now, some of these sources are, as we said, census takers who are very busy. Oh, by the way, they misspell everything, right? So I can't even, these were easy names. It's been pretty fascinating how many times they take a simple name and they screw that up. So, but who gets to tell the story is another aspect I want us to consider. I call it the bloviator problem, because in reality, our best storytellers in our family are probably those very energetic people, loud, lots of opinions. They get it out there. They see what's resonating with their audience, so they embellish that, they squelch something else. That's not a truth. That's again a very firm bias of things. And I found a situation like that when I was writing about my great-great-grandmother who was from Sicily. She was widowed with her pregnant with her sixth child. So widowed while pregnant with her sixth child. The ages of the boys ran, from 16 to naught. My great-grandfather was 16 and she sent him to the United States. Now she had money. She had enough money. They owned land. She used her maiden name. She did not use her married name. So the three older boys had come to the United States sort of staggered. And then the three youngest she brought over at once. The three older had their father's last name. The three younger had reverted to her last name. So it was really sort of a confusing situation, again, with records. And they all seemed to have lots of nicknames. So she would be Rosaria, she'd be Lena, she'd have, I was trying to piece these pieces together. Well, my great uncle John and Anthony would come over to the house and they were hysterical. And I remember as a little girl just loving it when they'd come and I'd sort of sit on the floor around their feet. And they would be telling these stories about the old country. And they'd never been, but they had this idea of what it was. Because their dad never wanted to go back. He thought it was a hellhole. Their grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, they called her the Dowager Queen. And I remember my grandmother going, Now she's an in-law, right? Or an outlaw, however you want to look at it. And so they're talking about the Dowager Queen, and the Dowager, of course, is the widow of the king who still thinks she's the queen. And they use that term. There was a little bit of awe and respect for what she had accomplished, but you could tell it was sort of a negative term. Even as a little girl, I picked that up. But I thought she was so cool. I mean, you bring your boys over to the United States. She started up a dry goods store, and she put it under her name, A. Ranella and Sons. She was A. Ranella. She was, she put her name up on the big marquee, and she was savvy enough to know that all those Italian migrants who would come over to build the Erie Canal were probably missing that wonderful home-cooked food. So she was doing all that. So this entrepreneurial spirit, this being able to send her family over to the United States. What I've since discovered too, it was always the men who left their families to go over. So in Sicily, a lot of the men had come over to build on the Erie Canal and take jobs, leaving wives and kids home, oftentimes not returning. So it was very unusual for a woman to make that trek. And her husband never made that trek. And now I want to think, wow, maybe he never wanted to go and she always wanted to go. She was the one who, so I don't think it was his dream she was fulfilling. I think she was fulfilling her own dream. Anyway, I started thinking about the term dowager and how this sort of negative terminology might have come about. And then it dawned on me one day, she had 6 sons who had 6 wives. So it's the daughters-in-law, I'm pretty convinced, are the ones that looked at this very authoritarian woman and said, she thinks she's the Dowager Queen. And I don't know, but in my story about her, I put it as a perhaps. Would they have come up with the same terminology if she had had 6 daughters? Do you think her daughters would have come up with that term to describe their mother who had come over with all these babies and teenage boys to start anew? I doubt it. So that's how I handled that semantic memory or episodic memory. And I started sort of pulling it apart so that I could look at it with a little bit more empathy. So I call that the bloviator problem. I also have a couple of other uncles that were really good BS artists, and they always told their version of the truth. And so I think one of the ways we think about a good storyteller is that they are editors, right? They're editing what's going on around them to make sure that it's impacting their audience in the way that they want. And it becomes a self-serving situation too, right? People that are in the room want to hear these stories. So you're going to get that bias too. It's sort of that self-fulfilling bias. I want to take a look now and start thinking in terms of context. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm working on this book about Leonore Burley. And I wanted to, Leonore Carney is related to us. Leonore Carney Berry was her first husband, and then she married Obadiah Lake. So there's lots of names in this, and following all these different names is interesting. In adding context, I had very little about William Berry, her first husband. I thought, this woman spent a lot of time with this man. She had 3 children by him. I need to be able to say something about him. And I had a name. That's all I had. And there's a million William Berrys. And there's a million in Australia and Canada and throughout the United States. So that wasn't helping at all. I finally was able to find an obituary, and the obituary really gave me, it was 4 paragraphs, but they were 4 really good paragraphs that had some great adjectives in it. He was a band leader. He was 9 years in the British Army, even though he came from Canada. And of course that triggered that, oh yeah, that was right. It was part of Canada at that point. So I had these different pieces of being a musician. He was a musician and a painter. I found a directory, a city directory, and it said painter. And I was like, was painter like portraits? And then it dawned on me, he was painted houses. So, which also is interesting because he later died of tuberculosis. Was the tuberculosis because he'd spent time in the military, in these hot, humid countries? I knew the countries that he'd served in. Was it exacerbated, lung damage exacerbated by working with the leaden paints? So it gave me a lot more context from which I can expand these, 3 paragraphs that had a lot of facts in it into something that is now a story. So I do have a story on William Berry. And it was pretty lengthy considering what I started with. I was actually pretty proud of that piece because he was a cornet player, and I'm assuming he was a cornet player in the military because, where else was he going to be a leader of a band and a composer, and doing all these military marches? So I'm pretty certain that was part of his background as well. So by adding context to these few facts that we had, it gave me, a very large story to tell, which was really, like I said, pretty exciting for me. I think one of the things that I want to say too about context is that you're not adding in a falsehood. You're not making a false assumption. I did not make statements to items that I didn't know were true facts. I make suppositions, and I clearly state that they are a supposition based on these other things. So it's sort of like showing my math, right? Showing how it all added up and how I came to this conclusion or theory or whatever you want to call it. I've since found a newspaper article. It's a fact. There is a newspaper article. And in the newspaper article, there was a William Berry in Potsdam, New York, where they lived, who was arrested because he had played he was a leader of a band, and he stabbed the gentleman who he played the gig with for non-payment. And I found a subsequent article, and it said that he was found guilty and they sentenced to 3 years. So now I've been trying to get the prison records to find out, how old was this William Berry? Is it the same William Berry? Is it a different? No, the William Berry I'm always writing about is William E. Berry. Did the E come about after the fact? They also said he was a deserter from the British military. So I went to our friend ChatGPT and I said, okay, these are the facts. What do you think? Is it the same person? It actually came back with a probability of 85% that it was the same one, although recognizing that there were many William Barrys out there. I said, but it said he was a deserter, and we know he served 9 years because that's in the obit. And he said, aha, I don't know. I don't know for a fact that this part is true. I need to double check my ChatGPT facts. And that was a joke because we know they hallucinate. It said that 9 years is what you served in the military. Your contract was 9 years, but then you had 3 years in the reserved. So I said, well, why would it say that he was that he had left it? He was AWOL. And they said, I swear, ChatGPT admonished me. It said, come on, it was like a prosecutor's story. It's going to paint the picture it wants to get the guilty verdict. I was like, okay, ChatGPT, I stand corrected here. So the idea was that perhaps Canada did not have a reserve service, so he never got his honorable discharge. He may have left, he may have been sick, there may have been a whole host of reasons. So again, that's another fact you need to look into when you hear that somebody left, went AWOL. What are the facts associated with it? Because there may be more extenuating circumstances. Now, I'm still pushing on this because this happened in March of 71, and Leonora and William E. Barry were married in November of 71. So I don't think, did he get out of it? I mean, I couldn't find another people. So maybe it's just two different people with the same last name, same name that were band leaders, and that was the end of it. So now I want to talk about how you take all this information you've been looking at, right? You've got your fact, you've got your feelings, you've looked at who's telling the story. Did they have an axe to grind? Were they out there just trying to get that rage bait or clickbait headline, and so they skewed the story a certain way? You've added the context, the historical context of what's going on around that person at a given time. And now I'm going to suggest we take an empathetic lens. How do we take a fact, such as the Dowager Queen, and we now look at it through a different lens? The lens of a daughter, perhaps, who is going to look at her mother in a very different way than perhaps the daughters-in-law might have. So is there a way to shift that framework and now look at this person who was a homemaker, but made the clothing for 9 children, who taught in the schools as often as they possibly could, who made all the grandchildren's gifts every year, right after Christmas would start making them, who helped volunteer and put on a wing of a hospital. You can see how just by changing that lens from what you were originally told, you can expand your story into something really tremendous, and hopefully make it exciting for the whole family. So I think what you want to look at are the adjectives used to describe somebody. Who was funny? Were they funny because they were really a drunk and they, other people laughed at them? And as a small child, you might think everybody was laughing, so it was funny. But older children might go, that wasn't funny. It was really pretty sad. Or the difficult one. Why was somebody difficult? What was going on in their life that made them difficult? Were they widowed at a young age with 4 or 5 mouths to feed and no ability to earn a real living? And so is that what made them difficult or harsh? Might be another one. When somebody came here only with a nickel, okay, did they have a nickel, but they also had a degree? Again, these are ways that you're taking the facts and expanding them. So anyway, I think I've sort of covered a lot of this. Do you guys have any questions? I would love to open it up. And if you have some family lore that you'd like to explore about how to make it bigger and put that empathetic lens on it. I would love to do that with you guys now while we have a little bit of time. Anybody?
Gosh, Diane, this has been fabulous. This has been fabulous, Diane. You have me really thinking about one element you haven't mentioned, and that is our role as a storyteller. Within family history, there is always this tension, which in many ways plays out in the distinction between family storytellers and genealogists, in the sense of, are we just after the facts and don't trust anything that isn't a fact? Or are we just all into so and so said, so it must be true? Well, one would assume that the right answer is somewhere in between. But you have raised a number of really interesting ways to be looking at this, to break it down between the semantic and episodic memory. And I was immediately going to that classic phrase, people will not, what is this, Dale Carnegie or somebody? They won't remember what you said. They'll remember how it made them feel. And that actually is exactly that split. It's not about the facts. It's about how it makes you feel. It's the make you feel part that sticks. Well, our job, as I see it anyway, in capturing these stories of family history is about making them so that they will be remembered. They will be remembered. So just the facts is kind of just the start. It gives someone else a framework to go on. But what was the part that made it feel? And sometimes we talk about how the context now sets why that fact happened. What are we doing as editing the stories that we pass down further?
Yeah, I think that, when you start off with a story, and the way I handle it, and everybody's going to handle it differently, is I do a braid. I do a braid of maybe a current event, my own experience, and this person's history. And I look at, like, is there a way, there's a lesson learned, there's something that they did that can apply to my life, my experience, and maybe, listen, there's just enough negativity out in the universe. I could write a really negative column every day of the week. I don't want to do that. I want to come out with something that is positive and a different way of looking at things and seeing if it can relate and connect to our lives today. So that's been my goal as I write these different essays.
I love that idea of a braid. And by inserting your own context to it, you then become the placeholder for themselves, your future readers, whom you may not know, who may be the grandchildren of the children you're talking to today. You may never know them, but putting in the context of where you're coming from, it's like such and such today, is delightful.
My dog thought that was a good point you made.
It's in your lap.
Sorry.
Others? Go ahead. You need to unmute. And Anne, I see you too. Go ahead.
I remember my great-grandfather really well because I was a teenager when he died. So he was always, to me, a very funny man, and he was always old, of course, but he was really funny. And by the way, Diane, he played the cornet also in the Salvation Army band. But my mother, as we're talking about him, she said, "Oh no, we used to hate going over there because he was a really cranky old thing." And he had a walking stick, and he used to always grab my little cousin around the neck. He was a boy, we were all girls, and he was a boy, and of course considered a bit of a devil. So not in a cruel way, and just sort of put the stick around his neck and say, "And what have you been getting up to now?" And I thought that was hilarious. But apparently he hated it, his mother hated it, and everyone else hated it, which never really occurred to me, So as Mum was talking about him, because he was very dear to her, but he was a cranky old thing, I could just see the difference in how I saw him as a child. And it just makes me think, I wonder how the people around me see me as compared to my grandchildren, how they see me, you know. So yeah.
Yeah. Excellent.
Memory is sort of
Anne, go
Yep.
ahead, please.
So I'm just getting started on this, but I have a lot of information. My grandmother, maternal grandmother, won the Commander of the British Empire in 1920 in England for the work that she did as a civilian during the First World War. And my mother was, I'll say, orphaned, but she went into foster care. So her mother came to Canada to have my mother because she thought that was important, New World, all that kind of stuff. And then she died, and it's a much longer story. But at any rate, her father never came to get her, but he did keep a fair amount of information about his ex-wife. And so when he died, it was in his will, and he sent it to my mother, who then gave it to us just before she died, which was 2011. So we have no memories at all of our grandmother. She was gone a long time ago. My mom was only 9 when she went into foster care. And because of the stature, we do have newsprint articles and, things like that. So I've started collecting all of that. But you were talking about facts, Diane, right in the beginning. And we have her birth certificate saying she was born in 1880. We have 3 census, and we know the years of those census, and she's a different age. She was a different age in her 2 marriage certificates. She was even a different age in her death certificate. Almost always younger, never older, usually 3 to 4 years. One was as much as 10 years. And it's like, okay, obviously the birth certificate is the fact. But there's all sorts of other stuff in there that is confounding the facts, and us trying to figure out why would she give her name or give her age differently, and not. So at any rate, my brother and I have hired a historian in England, and a genealogist, and are starting to get more information. But that was the first thing that jumped out at us, is like, why is she a different age in everything? So I don't know. It was just a comment on the facts.
Were there different laws associated with age? But usually it's the other way. It would be you're trying to make yourself older so that you could,
She was listed as younger than both her husbands. First one died of diabetes in 1911, so before insulin. She was younger than him by a couple of years. She was younger than her second husband. There is a CV that was put together by the people she worked with for the award, and there's a 4-year difference on that one. And then, as I said, even on the death certificate in Canada. So there are 2 census in England, 1 in Canada, and her death certificate in Canada, and it has the wrong age.
That's just fascinating. And I have to think that, so I'm thinking back to all the documents as I was caring for my mom, all of the documents that ask for age and ask for birth dates and so on. How many of them are asking for a backing document to prove what you're saying is true? Very few. In the days before computers that might be tracking, with validation by what you're saying. Sure, you can't lie about that kind of thing. But back in the day, was anybody checking? Certainly nobody. I was, what do they call it? The agent, the reporter that told the city or the county when my mom passed the names of her parents and the dates in which they were born or whatever other data they were asking for. Nothing is validating that.
No.
Could it
It's just very much a mystery if she was trying to be younger, for whatever reasons, maybe. So, husbands didn't want to marry an
Yeah.
older woman.
Yeah, that's
But
probably one.
everything else, it was just even the death certificate. And my mother would not have been old enough to make any comment on the death certificate. Even
Yeah.
when she gave birth to my mother, the age in my mother's birth certificate is off by 4 years. It says she was 39 and she was really 43, which is very old in those days to have a first child.
Hey,
It
once
just
you're lying,
back to me,
yeah,
it was
once you're having
oh.
a loose relationship with the truth, what's a few details?
And yet she was this very famous woman, only not famous. I mean, she's totally forgotten, like many women, she's totally forgotten. But that whole idea of what is a fact is, I think, debatable.
It's funny, the historians all said that Leonora, after they said that she resigned from the Knights of Labor in 1889 because she was remarrying and believed that a woman's place was in the home.
Mm.
And that's because she changed her name when she remarried, and nobody was looking for her under her new name, Mrs. Obadiah Reed Lake. And if they had been, or Mother Lake, she went by, she was speaking on the Chautauqua circuit, and she was giving literally hundreds for the next 35, 40 years. She was on this speaking circuit, and she was president of the Temperance Association and the Temperance League. And I mean, her CV after the pivot, which I think that's going to be, Anne, you were suggesting that on what you're pivoting now. And I was thinking, oh, I think I'm going to use that in my next essay. I mean, women are forced to pivot a lot. And because we pivot all the time, we don't necessarily build up that, that I don't know, single label that a man might have. You were this, you were this, you're this.
Reinvention.
Reinvention. Yeah. Well, I'm fortunate. I kept my maiden name and I've been married 40 years. So, but it was just interesting because you started off with that and I am just getting started. And my pivot is writing this book and I hope to sell it as an historical fiction with as much fact in it as I can possibly do. Because I do think today, as women are being erased again, and she was forgotten, and the only reason we know about this is because of the inheritance. How many women won the commander of the British Empire? I mean, really, very, very,
done.
very, very rare. So that's my pivot. And Diane, you're the first to know.
I'm excited. I'm excited. And I have no doubt it's going to be successful like everything you do. So that's.
Oh, thank you. Anyway, just interesting.
Is it possible? I was thinking about this. Is it possible it was, I mean, it sounds to be deliberate. It sounds like she was always.
I think it was deliberate.
Yeah.
I think it was deliberate.
But maybe she didn't want that oldness associated with, especially if she had such a role within the, was age and a huge issue? Was there a forced retirement or anything like that?
I don't know. I know my mother was forced to retire when she got married. But I don't know. I don't know enough about that at this point. She was single when she first started to work, which I think as well would have been quite unusual in 1905. But she must have used that age at that point when she got the job, because it was that same job in 1920 that won her the award. So I don't know, but maybe it was, didn't want to be a spinster, didn't want to be an old maid, didn't want to be old in the role, didn't want to be having a baby so late in life, how horrible that was. Things like that. I don't know. I don't know yet.
My grandmother always said, if you're going to lie about your age, go up, so that, I'm 110. Oh, man, you look great for 110.
Instead of down.
Why are you going to say you're 28 when you look like
Yes. Anyway, so that was just my comment on facts. How much is a fact a fact?
So I'm curious, just as a wrap up from my perspective, do you have a couple stories in mind that you might want to, Jennifer or Linda, Naomi, that you might want to tack a little bit differently now that you're thinking in terms of, was it really a fact?
Okay, I'll go. I'm finding out, I mean, Canada is so new in the West, in the prairie provinces. And I'm finding a few roadblocks when you come to try to find out information. My mom's parents came, my grandfather came a year before grandma. And I only found out this just recently. And so, of course, he was working here. And then she came from England to Winnipeg and they got married. And to try and even get the certificate, all it has on there is their names. It doesn't give any details about where they came from, doesn't say who the parents are, this whole blank page. And I'm thinking, that's pretty bad because this is 2025 and this happened in 1907 when they were married. And there's nothing on this paper except their names. So how do you attach any credibility to, I mean, it's their marriage certificate, I know that, but it doesn't have parents' names, nothing. So it's pretty hard. Where do you start the story? Because I didn't even know that he came and worked before and she came a year later. So I'm thinking, yeah, that was in Manitoba, and there's nothing in the Manitoba except this 2 lines with their names on and the date they got married.
Wow. I wonder if, Manitoba Historical Society, or I'm just making that up. I assume there's some kind of a historical society or genealogical society or something like that of people who are familiar with local records and what other kinds of supporting records might be around from that community, birth certificates for children, for example, that sort of thing. Census, of course, that might include other details and who else might have been in the household, that kind of thing.
Well, they have, yes, I can find out that in the census and things. And of course, I know when everybody was born, because a couple of kids were born in Manitoba and the other in Saskatchewan, like my mom. But yeah, it's just to get how they got here and got married and no details. I presume they just went, I don't know, it wasn't in a church, obviously. Maybe they just went to some office. I have no idea. Doesn't tell
What
me
year?
anything.
What year is this?
1907.
So one of the things you might look into is, did they have a parish? I don't know what denomination it was, but I know that on the Leonora side, they didn't have parish priests in this area of upstate New York. It was very rural. And so they had like traveling priests. And I don't know what they did for record. I mean, I had a terrible time with the Irish records in general. It's just because the Catholic Church wasn't allowed in Ireland at that time. So there weren't church records. Italy was a totally different story. But I don't know if there's
I don't think there was a church involved. That's what I mean. Did they go
No,
to
I understand that.
government office? I wonder, and
Right.
got married. I'm presuming because it doesn't say any church. It doesn't say a minister. Doesn't say anything. Yeah, and somebody said maybe they're trying to update these archives. Well, they better get at it because I mean this is 2025. That was 1907. So I mean I'll never find out probably.
So they didn't have witness names or anything.
There's nothing on the paper. It's just a blank
Like a receipt. They got married.
Yeah, just their names. That's it. Yeah. So I have a feeling that maybe I need to contact Manitoba and say why isn't this updated? Right?
Yeah.
So
Well, you
maybe
may
they're
in fact find that that is just the receipt, that there is another document. Who knows?
yeah. Well, this just got printed a couple of weeks ago because I've been going to the Mormon church and this is what we found. So we didn't find too much. Yeah. Anyway, that was just my problem. How do you put things together? I mean,
Yeah.
back then, I mean, I know
Yeah,
kind
I
of the
found some
rest of it.
records tucked away in a on
Yeah.
yeah.
Of course,
In my own
Mom
family,
never
I found
talked about that. She probably didn't know it either, right?
yeah.
You might not have known that. I don't know. Yeah. So facts kind of are hard to find back there, especially in because that was such, well, they weren't it was a province then, that's all. It had just become a province, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So who knows? We'll keep searching.
You know, that is something that's very true across, I think, Australia, Canada, and certainly older records to the United States. You have places that are, you know, what we used to call the Old West. They are adventurous, you know, just getting started, making things up kind of civil society. And that's another angle of trying to understand where exploration of what it was like without facts, just what the community was like what the space was like, and can give you, as Diane says, some ways to use skills of empathy to understand what the experience might have been like, and then ask new questions to go find new answers, right?
Yeah. We'll keep searching.
You got it.
Anyway, thank you. It was a great program.
Well, why don't we go ahead and take it as a wrap there? I want to thank you so much, Diane, for joining us for this and taking this on and telling us a little bit about Leonora. And I look forward to hearing about your progress on the book itself out into 2030. Before, of course. I think that is the kind of thing that each of us looks at as we look into the curiosities in our own families and ways to peel back the layers and understand them, as well as, frankly, just understanding the people around us. It is a pleasure, as always, to have all of you joining us. I hope to see you at more of these kinds of events and joining in on the dialogue. This, of course, is a recording that we will be sharing to all Project Kin members, and enjoy the discussion that often comes up years and months later as we say, remember that conversation with Diane and the whole business about Sundays and empathy and facts and semantic memory? What? Again, thank you so much, Diane. This has been lovely.
It's my pleasure. It was so much fun. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Diane.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.